I am going to introduce my other favorite colleague from College Unbound, the Director of Digital Pedagogy, my co-author and friend for now, gosh, almost going on a decade, Lance Eaton, who is a person that I've learned so much about teaching from. Please let me introduce my amazing colleagues from Urban College to you, and you can teach us what you know about teaching hybrid. Let us learn from you this evening. Lance, welcome to the team.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me, Danielle. And when you invited me, and having worked with you, or having been in collaboration for so many years, hearing the tone difference in your enthusiasm and excitement about being at Urban College and the kind of faculty you are getting to meet and work with, I would hesitate to do any comparisons between Urban College and College Unbound faculty. I think we probably would be an amazing collaborative collective of people who are deeply involved in teaching and learning with students who are walking many different walks of life and needing support in ways that traditional higher education just doesn't meet them. And so I'm really glad to be here to be talking with you and sharing some initial thoughts and hopefully a conversation about hybrid teaching and learning. So I'm going to need the share screen button activated. And I will share. I have a couple slides. The way I structure this is like we have a half hour. I want to give a few what I think are like the big ticket items of thinking about hybrid, and that should take maybe 5 minutes. I'm going to walk you through a course that I've done as hybrid, or just give you the highlights of a course I've done as hybrid and the ways I've made that work, and that'll be maybe another 5 minutes. And then I have a series of questions that I'm going to ask you that will be kind of a opportunity for conversation for the rest of the session, rather than just me talking. So now that I can share, let's see if I can get this all together. People can see my screen. Let me do the slideshow thing. Can I get a thumbs up from folks that they can see it? All right, cool. So yeah, hybrid possibilities, exploring modalities of learning. So as I said, I just want to give some kind of big level ways of thinking about and considering what would it mean, what could it look like as you think about going from either entirely synchronous or an entirely asynchronous, where students do their thing and you kind of grade it as you go along, give feedback, engage, but don't necessarily have a same time and place. Or you're in the other model where you are meeting regularly, but you may be now starting to look to trade off some of that meeting time for doing more online activities. So the thing to always kind of center is really thinking about what would, in the course, as you look at it, what would benefit from live interaction, and really thinking about that, thinking about, if we are going to come together, what is driving it? And one way I have folks think about this is, I have no doubt we have all been to a meeting where we've been like, that could have been an email. Think about your course the same way. When is it content and when is it engagement? When is it just people, sharing ideas, or people kind of delivering information, versus really getting into the weeds and really, going back and forth. So that's one thing to kind of think about. And along that lines, content exploration is better for asynchronous. Here I am and I'm giving this talk, and yeah, there's a part of me that, were we to do this, in a different way, it would be, I would do this as a recording and then we'd come together to talk about it. Because I think there's a couple different benefits around having that content canned, whether it's readings or mini lectures, and that is for people, especially ESL, people who English is a second language, people who, like myself, will sometimes have audio processing issues. I'm better to watch it and be able to rewatch it, to be able to watch it with closed captions, than I am in the live space. And so just thinking about that, and how, if you are doing that, then that means when you're live and you're together, there's more ways you can think about being active. So thinking about that, in the live space, you might be thinking about ways of like debriefing and discussing, analyzing, or applying content in those live activities. So it's more about, you get the what, or one way that people really find this useful is they get the what from the content, and that's often the things they're doing asynchronously, and they figure out the why, or they get the how when they're in that face-to-face space and really trying to like play with and grapple with what they're encountering, or work through challenging problems or dynamics about it. And that's really what you should be thinking about, is these live sessions really should be active, not passive. If they're showing up to be, to be talked at, or be showing up to just go over, to go through a lecture, or those type of things probably are, again, best in that asynchronous space, because it allows for rewatching, for slowing down or speeding up. I spoke about having auditory challenges, and I do. And at the same time, I'm also a fast listener if the sound is appropriate. And so I can listen and process at a quicker speed. And I would find that a better use of my time than easily getting distracted in a space where the talk is, the lecture might not be going at the same speed. So what I'm trying to highlight here is, when we are thinking about content, creating a space where people have more control over how they engage with that content, I think, is really important. And when we're in when we're in a live situation, really thinking about how can we get students doing, talking, considering, really making that as a space of, it's not easy to recreate. It's not something that is just, very simply, we can just copy and paste that into a space. Um, at the same time, if we are doing any kind of asynchronous work, we should probably be including some interaction. So a good example for that I'll share that I regularly do is, if I have students doing reading, I'll often have that reading in something like a Google Doc, and part of the expectation of the reading is also annotating, highlighting passages, highlighting snippets of the text, writing questions, writing thoughts. So think about, it shouldn't just be all um, content that they're engaging with, but there should be something that also they're doing in that space. And then really making sure, as you're constructing a course and you're starting to introduce it to students, just, what are the uses and expectations of the different spaces? Hybrid, we use this one term, hybrid, and it has so many different meanings. It has so many different contexts. It is, we can identify what face-to-face is, we can identify what online is, or asynchronous online is, but hybrid, it's like, 52 flavors of ice cream. It can come in lots of different forms, and so as you think about it, making sure it's clear what those forms are within your course, so that there's a clarity around, when you say hybrid, or how you're using it, this is where students should show up in the virtual or asynchronous spaces. This is how they should show up in the live spaces, and that's sometimes overlooked. We sometimes will think students will just get it, but I think there's also, an important kind of thinking in our own head, so we have it clear, and communicating that to students. And then, like any good practice, because first time you may be teaching hybrid, or maybe the fifth time you're teaching hybrid, or 100th time, really always checking with the students about the modality, and how those things are working, and where there's tension, or where there's things that might be just, unexpected, because as we gather with each group of students, we have a very different mix, and so we can't expect, if it worked really well the fifth time we taught it, the sixth time it's going to work the exact same way, because we have a different population. We may have to adjust accordingly, or we may have to hear from students to understand where there might be tension or challenge with the way that it's set out. So Oh, glad to hear, Caleb, that I'm not the only one. Actually, my theory about it is I do better when it plays faster, because it's easier for me to pay attention and not lose in between the gaps. But that's my own assumptions. So let me just give you an example of my American literature course. So this was a course for years I taught face-to-face. It had a very kind of clear format, and I've turned it into different types of hybrid courses. And one is, structured that before class, so before we meet, They'll have 1 to 2 mini lectures that they will be watching that I've recorded and are just there, and they'll watch them. They'll move into a few short stories or a few readings. Those short stories or readings, they will probably be doing some annotation. So as they're reading, they're highlighting, they're noting, etc. And then there's probably some pre-reflection activity, meaning them just kind of thinking about what they've seen and thinking about what that will mean for where we are in the course. Then we'd move into the live session. And this is what I really like. This is to me what's really great about hybrid is then even for a literature course, it becomes all about doing. So they come into the class, we'll spend some time just like checking in, like doing a little bit of check of like, what are the questions that you have about the mini lectures? What are things that drew your attention in the short stories? Like really using that pre-reflection activity to stimulate that conversation that's going to happen in class. But using that and then moving into activities. And there's a bajillion types of activities. So it can be everything from like small group debates and discussions to us actually pulling up the text and, whether it's on a screen or people pulling up on their own, really getting a chance to do some live annotating or like drawing out what we're seeing and how we're making sense of it. I've at times really enjoyed, with literature, actually giving them a challenge to visualize the work. Like, okay, here's this piece. How do you visualize this? And get them thinking across like different modalities. And then that also opens up the opportunity to do a gallery walk where you can have, 2, 3, 4 groups of students all do a visual representation of either like the same poem or story and have each explain their take on it. Another is just giving them either as a written challenge or as a like group challenge where they kind of come up with things regarding the work. So it's maybe they're going to try to mimic the writing, which then opens up the conversation of like why those choices, or write a new ending, or write, how would the story look from a different character's, from a different character's point of view. So it's really just this fun time to really like explore and really get people to dig into it in a way that, at least for me in teaching literature, is sometimes hard because often in the live sessions, it's like, oh, I'm racing to like explain the content and do this and do that. And it's like, no, because of the hybrid nature, those things happen outside the live space. And in the live space, we really dig in. Um, and then after the class, there's usually a couple activities around, students review the activity and outcomes and connect it to whatever is on their ongoing work within the course. Along those lines, there'd be a reflection activity. So they're kind of tying together everything that they've seen this week and what still lingers, what's still, what's new that they've understood, et cetera. And then me as the instructor creating bridges from this week that's just happened and angling it in how it sets us up for next week. And that's usually an announcement or a short video. And that helps them as they move into the beginning, before live session for next week, where they're looking at the mini lectures and that pre-reflection activity. All right. So that's just, like I said, a very quick, short explanation of what it is. But I'm kind of curious to hear from the group at large. And you can do this by taking yourself off mute, or you can do this by throwing it into the chat. But, when you hear hybrid teaching, what comes to mind? I can't see the raised hands. So if somebody else sees the raised hands and wants to call on that person, great. If you just want to unmute and go for it, that's awesome too. Some online and some in person, absolutely. Split, right? And some of it is trying to figure out like, what is that balance? What does that look like? Right, so Danielle puts in half online, half in person. And that's an interesting thing because not everybody sees it that way. And not every institution does it that way. So that's a thing to kind of be mindful of, is like, what is that what is the institutional definition? Time together, time for individual learning, multiple methods. Absolutely. Going to throw a few other things in here of, when I hear it, like what makes it hybrid, which is what some people have been discussing. in those questions of how is it different from traditional learning or online learning, and how will I know what to do in the different places? And I think that's, some of thinking about what are the opportunities that the different places allow for us. Like, what are the advantages of asynchronous learning or online teaching? It's been around for 25 years and there's lots of people that swear by it. And so thinking about what are the things that do really well in there and what are the things that do really well in the live environment. Here's the fun one. What worries you about hybrid teaching and learning?
What worries me is the attendance and consistency.
Can you say more about consistency?
Consistency
Thank
in terms of, to have a clear, first of all, to have a clear idea about the institution or the college, protocol, and how we are going to assess the attendance and the participation of the students.
Mm,
And
yeah.
it's, to me, it has been a challenging to assess that. I can have a student who could be very passive in one model and could be very confrontational to each other and the other one, because, so that's the part that to me is a challenging.
No, I think that's absolutely a great example. Figuring out that participation and what it looks like in different spots. And I think that ties into a little bit of Allison, of what Allison mentions in the chat of like, oops, sorry, the chat went really quick, really fast. I missed there we go. That if students come to the live session and haven't yet engaged with the content, the activities may not be effective. And that's part of why that pre-flexion activity that I mentioned, having something like that also, you can use that almost as like the ticket to play or the ticket to come, not the ticket to come to class, but like the acknowledgement of like you're prepared to come to class. Because if you haven't, then whatever you like, if they're doing exploring that content online, and before they come to class, they have to complete something. There's a lineage of at least knowing who is prepared to what level, and then that also allows for some flexibility of how you respond to that. In some ways, it can help make you a little more prepared than in a traditional class where, again, if you assign homework and you're not quite sure who has done what. Students will complete the asynchronous work since the material is all gone over it. Will students complete the asynchronous work since material, so this is from Jamie, since material is also gone over during the in-person? So the thing about I think that's an interesting question. For me, it's in the live class, and that's why I really talk about it as like, there's a debrief or like a, hey, drawing out the important things, but the need to still do it, like that conversation is never enough to just wing it. And also that's, again, that you have some kind of mechanism. You make sure that space isn't just the passive, but that the online space there's something that they're engaging in before they come into the class. That helps prepare them, that helps prepare you for thinking about, okay, I know half the students have like engaged in this activity. Great. I know another, some students have not. So there's a conversation to be had there about like what's going on and why, and how do we find that right balance? Is it live in person or real-time Zoom classes? I'm guessing that's going to I think that can be answered by Danielle, but
Yeah, I can, and I'm also watching the chat too with you, Lance, to say that, that was one of the other questions that kind of got asked, which is, I think it was Allison back up in the chat that kind of mentioned the question about kind of what counts as hybrid can be defined by each campus. So I think one of the things that is important, especially sort of in our kind of post-pandemic world where online learning is something that every student and every instructor on every campus is dealing with, is that campuses like ours have to be really clear about making sure that we explain to students before a semester starts very clearly, what do we mean by hybrid classes, and sharing that definition before the start of a semester, and making sure that students know at the start of our class, this is what we are saying our hybrid class is, and here are the expectations for this class. So, for example, many campuses define their hybrid class as being, before the pandemic started, a hybrid class was almost universally known as you had to come partly to the on-campus, to the actual classroom, the physical classroom, and then part of it was online. But now that people are much more comfortable with this sort of virtual interaction like we're having right now, hybrid is now oftentimes thought of as partly through a synchronous time like we're having now, and partly through asynchronous. So hybrid is more thought of as the split between synchronous time and asynchronous time. So really it's about that being very clear at the start of a semester and in our syllabus about the and when students are signing up for classes about what we are expecting of our students. So, but again, when students are taking classes at multiple different campuses and we're teaching at multiple different campuses, I know I have been and many of you are, we got to keep all of that consistent in our head. It's hard to do. So I think that's one of our challenges, as are these technology barriers that we're all talking about here too, helping to make sure that we make sure our students know what they'll need to access at the start of any kind of hybrid teaching experience, what the expectations will be. This is what we'll be using in our class, and here's how I'm going to make sure that you know how to use it. I think is important too. That's a good point.
Yeah, and I think the equity question is really important, and the equity and access question is always going to be central as we think about this, and that as well can shape how you think about how you split these spaces. And for me, I'll say with the equity piece, one of the things that has been really helpful in working in these places, especially as we start to deal with like technology and stuff, is that when we move the conversation to equity, we start to move away from equal, which often in education, it's everybody must have the same experience, in really thinking about where things make sense to adjust in relation to the student along around that question of equity and access. Because it then, like for me, that's been a great opener of really thinking about and leaning into hybrid in feeling comfortable making adjustments in conversation, not on behalf of, but in conversation with students about in relation to the different challenges that they are going to face in relation to their education.
That's a good point, Lance. I'll just mention this real quick, which is, I think, might be one of the questions that some of my colleagues are thinking about that I'm not sure I was clear about answering. That happens sometimes when we're thinking about teaching, but I hope that one of the things that we're trying to do at Urban College, and we plan to do, is be open to different options for our classes. So I don't think that there is one right way to teach a class. And we want to try to develop our courses in ways that are going to meet our students where they are. And so, there was a time when every class at Urban College was in a classroom on our campus, and it was amazing. And I taught one of those classes and I loved everything about it. And our students, can't right now, all of our students cannot do that with us the way that we did in March of 2019. And we know that. And we are working to create all of our courses in an online asynchronous format. And we know that that also wasn't working exactly for every one of our courses. And so we have now made some adjustments so that some of our courses, for instance, even moving into the spring, will be available, just not all of our courses, but we have a couple of our classes, as Jen has just mentioned, where we are going to offer in a hybrid format. It'll be hybrid online. So for example, some of our English courses will be partly half online asynchronous and half online like we're doing right now. And that's partly why this workshop is happening the way it is. Now, that won't be all of our courses because there's still some planning that has to happen to make sure that we can have our students timing work out for students. So it's going to take some adjustment to find that sort of sweet spot for a schedule. And we have to make sure that we can work this for our students, but we'll find the right schedule for our courses and our instructors and to make things work for our students. But that flexibility is part of what makes equity part of the conversation in the equation, I think. So I'm excited to see some of you interested in this and excited about this conversation and willing to be flexible about trying this out, because that experimentation is so important for us as instructors. So thanks for your enthusiasm.
And I'll add in this process, one of the things that's evident here, and I'm just, because we're towards the end already, it goes by so fast, you're in a community of learners here who clearly are showing up and are interested in this, and there's a lot that you can learn from one another. The more I do this work, and I've been doing this work for 11 years now, or if I'm including teaching, 17 years now, the more you get into rooms with other faculty to talk about what's working, what isn't, what you're learning, what's valuable, what are resources and practices that are working, the more you can lean on one another and really find ways of supporting all your students and really thinking through how to do this well for your course and for your students. I'm happy to stick around for a few more questions. I know 6 o'clock and folks got things to do, but always happy to be here in community with folks.
Thanks, Lance. And, Allison just made a great point about the idea of being able to use that in-person time as a way to kind of reflect on things that might have been like the idea of confusing. I was thinking about Oscar, who was here, and Oscar teaches our math class, and Jennifer had mentioned the flipped class model. I'll just jump in if people are willing to give us a minute to say that flipped class model for anyone who works on courses where there is working on problems, or using case examples. One of the ways that in a hybrid course that I sort of have heard that can work really effectively to prevent the idea of students feeling like you're just repeating the information. If you are a student who actually is kind of like me, I get very anxious about school. So I'm always reading every single thing the faculty member puts in the class, that kind of thing. Well, instead of having that face-to-face time be like repeating the material, that face-to-face on camera time is actually working through having students work through the problem sets or working through case examples and having them do almost problem solving experiences together. I was thinking about Patty and I have similar kind of backgrounds and having students do sort of the case studies in human services as an example of and those aren't things that the students do asynchronously alone. They're much better when students are doing them in a team environment. And so when I was thinking about math and thinking about sciences, those are the sorts of things that in a hybrid course, that is what, you would do in the group environment. So role playing, that's a great example. Yeah. Demonstration of the skills. Mm-hmm. Well, if any of you teach public speaking like I do, the hybrid situation can be perfect for public speaking, because then you can actually have the students give the speech in front of the audience, instead of trying to figure out how to make that work sometimes asynchronously, which you all are better than me if you figure out how to do, because sometimes I struggle with that. So.
Danielle, in my case, teaching math, I have needed to acquire more more tools, electronic tools, to be able to show and to solve problem with the student during that interaction time. But in regular classes, I was using the board, and now I'm using a program that allow me to using an iPad connected to my computer and sharing the screen and using one of the electronic pencils. I'm able to show them in a very similar to classroom board the step of solving and discuss the different approaches, because for math, I really need that. I mean, I need to show how to do it, and just using the vocabulary or just telling them how to do that doesn't reflect well the skills. So I need to show them the skills doing it. But that requires more, how I can say, that requires more than just on a computer. It requires software, and it requires other equipment.
Yeah, I know Lance has kind of worked with some other faculty who've been in that same situation before. So that is something that we have to keep troubleshooting and working on.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
I used to do that with 2 video cameras and with 2 computers, but now, knowing that the software are there, I was able to get one and I installed it in my iPad and made all the connection to the computer. So I'm doing great now, but just for you to know that go beyond just just one laptop.
Bye, Allison. Lance, I know that we only have you for about 1 more minute before we're going to lose you. So I want to say thank you to all of my colleagues who've been here, and for those of you who have shared. Do you have any final parting words of reflection for all of us before we close our conversation for the evening?
Oh boy. Summing it all up, it's always going to be a little scary, or feel a little bit overwhelming. And that, I think that's always a good place to be in teaching, because that means we're also learners. Like, we're also learning and trying things, and therefore that builds us more, hopefully builds us more empathy with our students as they're also encountering it. And so I would just encourage, that learner's mind as you start to play around with this, and know that, everything is iteration. For me, that's really what I think about when teaching is everything. No matter how perfect I've done it, I'm always going to have to learn new things about doing it. And that's okay. That's part of the process. That's all I got.
Great.
Well,
Thank you.
I hope that you will all be lifelong learners with Lance, with me. And thanks to all of you for being here tonight and for showing such a commitment to our students by giving of your time so generously to learn about hybrid. Like I said, I know that this is just something that we're starting to kind of think about, creating some opportunities, and we've got room to grow and develop. But I really appreciate you all taking this leap and for joining us tonight in this conversation. Thank you for your time, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being willing to take on technology challenges. Oscar and my colleagues, you all are wonderful. You inspire me. I will see you all again soon.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Bye. Right? What do you think? Ah,
Wait,
yep.
Did I stop my recording? No, I did not.